Some of you asked me to speak about the Methuselah tree that came from the date palm seed that was 2,000 years old. And so I thought I'd talk about that. In this case, this is the ancient date palm that lived 2,000 years ago, and it's now bearing fruit. I'm just picking one of these articles to read by Miriam Kresh from Green Prophet. It was written 3 months ago, and it says Judean dates are famous in the Levant and Europe in ancient times, prestigious fruit treasured for their superior taste and alleged medicinal qualities. Jewish farmers grew them, but the Jews were driven out of Israel during the Second Roman Wars in 132 to 136 CE, and the secrets of the dates propagation were forgotten. In 2005, date pits excavated from the Masada fortress were revived almost miraculously by Professor Elaine Soloway of the Center for Sustainable Agriculture at the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies. And it says, read the story of the 2,000-year-old date pits that sprouted under her care here. When we first interviewed Soloway in 2012, she was hoping to make the male palm that sprouted named Methuselah with compatible female trees imported from Egypt. She didn't expect to see fruits from Methuselah and his green concubines for at least another 10 years. But edible dates from Methuselah and Hannah, a female palm sprouted from the pits of the same Judean variety, now exist. It's mind-blowing to realize that today we might taste dates grown from seeds eaten and thrown away 2,000 years ago. Dates that might have been eaten by Bar Kokhba, leader of the Jewish rebellion, or at least at a different time and place, eaten by Jesus and his followers. Dr. Sarah Salon of the Natural Medicine Research Unit of Hadassah Hospital initiated the project in 2005. The date pits excavated from the Masada fortress in the 1960s were lying in storage at the Bar Ilan University. Inspired to achieve the impossible, Salon issued a challenge to attempt sprouting them. Soloway answered the challenge and succeeded in germinating one solitary seed who grew tall and leafy, Methuselah. Spurred by the success, Soloway and Salon tried the experiment again. Out of 32 other excavated seeds, 6 sprouted and 2 are female. One, named Hannah, bore 111 dates. The team at the Arava Institute tasted some and sent the rest away for research. Ronley Conweiser managed a date farm some years ago and understands the pleasure of harvesting fruit. From 2008 to 2010, I was fortunate to be a foreman on the Jericho dates plantation, which is in the Judean desert adjacent to Jericho. What I learned from my experience as foreman is that dates and palm trees are very special. One of the very special qualities of a date is its ability to last. Most varieties of dates are harvested off the tree already in its dry form. And if stored correctly, it will last and be enjoyed at any time as if it was just picked. Therefore, it is not surprising, but really incredible, that 2,000-year-old seeds that were found in the Judean desert can still be viable. Thanks to the vision of Dr. Soloway and Salon, we now hope to see a grove of Judean date palms, DNA, true descendants of the fruit that the ancients ate. Maybe in time we'll even shop for them at the supermarket. Incredible. So all the other seeds that she sprouted have biblical names too. And if you go to the article about how she sprouted them, it says from greenprophet.com, 2,000-year-old date pit sprouts in Israel. And that was March 25th, 2012 by Miriam Kresh. And it says, Dates have always been a staple in the Middle Eastern diet. Mentions of them have come down from ancient times. Now the hope of actually eating the fruit of an extinct variety exists. The story goes back 2,000 years. In the ruins of the Masada fortress, the remains of an entire Jewish community lay for 2 millennia. Rather than yield to the conquering Romans of the 1st century, the rebel Jews, men, women, and children, committed collective suicide. Although they set fire to most of the buildings there, they left their food stores intact to show that they had not died of hunger. Because the site is isolated in the desert and hard to access, it remained undisturbed for 2,000 years. Archaeological work began there in the 1960s. Inside the ruins were found artifacts, some buried skeletons, and a jar containing fossilized fruit pits. Just as they were dumped there 2,000 years ago by some careful housewife. In the 1970s, the jar was extracted from a collapsed building and the seeds taken out. There were wheat grains and pomegranate and lupin seeds, as well as others we couldn't identify, says Professor Elaine Soloway of the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies. The date pits were initially passed to the botany department at Bar-Ilan University, where they lay there in storage until Dr. Sarah Salon of the Natural Medicine Research Unit of Hadassah Hospital heard of them in 2005. She transferred them to us. I tried all kinds of agricultural tricks and hoped for the best. Out of 3, only 1 sprouted in November 2011. We kept the sapling isolated to protect it from pests and agricultural diseases. We also kept its location secret so that no one could steal it. We call it Methuselah. It was miraculous enough that the world's oldest known viable seed had germinated, but naturally hopes were high for a fruitful female tree. Professor Soloway explained that Judean dates were considered the best of all varieties in the ancient world. They were unusually sweet and juicy, exported to Rome, and praised by 1st century naturalist Pliny the Elder. So closely identified with Israel were they that coins commemorating Rome's conquest of the land were engraved with images of a Judean date palm and the words Judea Capta. When I asked why the variety became extinct, Soloway explained, this date palm was propagated by offshoots, that is, by hand. When the Jewish farmers were forced out of their lands, there was no one left to do it. Eventually, even its ancient local name was forgotten. Can we hope to eat dates from this ancient palm someday? Methuselah is now over 2.5 meters tall and has flowered. But he's a male. We're considering breeding him to the closest modern relative, the Hiani date from Egypt, which was brought in via Sinai. We hope to have fruit within 10 years. And of course, now they do have the fruit, because I just read that article. This was a prior article to that one. According to writings from ancient masters of healing such as Pliny the Elder and Maimonides, Judean dates had medicinal qualities. I asked Professor Sarah Salon about this. As highly nutritious food, dates were considered a tonic, she said. Ancients claimed that they relieved depression and tuberculosis and made an effective poultice for infected wounds. Dates were also used as part of treatment for infertility and as aphrodisiacs. While reserving judgment about depression, tuberculosis, and reproductive remedies, it makes sense that a fruit as high in sugar as dates could draw out infected matter and thus accelerate wound healing. The same can be done with white sugar or honey in a pinch. Recently, Methuselah's age was tested by radioactive isotope carbon-14, confirming that the tree grew from a seed alive in 35 to 65 AD. Imagine tasting dates germinated from Methuselah, sort of like eating in a time warp, or for the carnivores among us, tasting an ancient elephant steak. And National Geographic says Methuselah, palm grown from 2,000-year-old seed, is a father. 10 years after sprouting from an ancient seed, the date palm is a big boy now, a scientist says, and yeah, he can make dates. And this was reported in March 24th, 2015. It says a male date palm tree named Methuselah that sprouted from a 2,000-year-old seed nearly a decade ago is thriving today, according to the Israeli researcher who's cultivating the historic plant. The plant was sprouted in a laboratory in 2005, and when a National Geographic news story about the event resurfaced this week on the social media website Reddit, we decided to check in on Methuselah and see how it's doing. And let's see, it says he's a big boy now, says Elaine Soloway, the director of Arava Institute for Environmental Studies at Kibbutz Keturah in Israel. He is over 3 meters or 10 feet tall. He's got a few offshoots. He has flowers and his pollen is good, she says. We pollinated a female with his pollen and a wild modern female, and yeah, he can make dates. In 2005, Soloway, an expert in desert agriculture, germinated the ancient seed which was recovered decades earlier from an archaeological excavation at Masada, a historic mountainside fortress. The seed had spent years in a research drawer in Tel Aviv. In the years since Methuselah first sprouted, Soloway has successfully germinated a handful of other date palms from ancient seeds recovered at archaeological sites around the Dead Sea. I'm trying to figure out how to plant an ancient date grove, she says. To do that, she'll need to grow a female plant from an ancient seed as a mate for Methuselah. So far, at least 2 of the other ancient seeds have sprouted are female. If Soloway succeeds, she notes, we would know what kind of dates they ate in those days and what they were like. They would be very exciting. In 2012, scientists in Russia were able to grow a plant from 32,000-year-old seeds that had been buried by an Ice Age squirrel in Siberia. Genetic tests indicate that Methuselah is most closely related to an ancient variety of date palm from Egypt known as Hayane, which fits with the legend that says dates came to Israel with the children of the Exodus, Soloway says. It's pretty clear that Methuselah is a Western date from North Africa rather than from Iraq, Iran, Babylon, she says. You can't confirm a legend, of course. In addition to Soloway's hopes of establishing an orchard of ancient dates, she and colleagues are interested in studying the plants to see if they have any unique medicinal properties. The other date palms sprouted from ancient seeds look similar to Methuselah, distinguishing characteristics, Soloway says, including a sharp angle between the fronds and spine. A lot of people have kind of forgotten about Methuselah, Soloway says. He is actually a really pretty tree. And of course, the date palm, the palm frond, was used in the waving of Jesus when he rode into Jerusalem on the donkey, which was the same day that Joshua crossed the Jordan into the Promised Land. And that was Nisan 10. And they were shouting to Yeshua in Hebrew, Hoshana Rabbah, and save us now, our King. And of course it's Hosanna in the highest, and that's what they say. Hoshana Rabbah is the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles. So it all comes together, and this Methuselah tree, and of course Methuselah died before the flood of Noah happened. And of course, who was Methuselah in the Bible? Methuselah was the son of Enoch. Enoch was 65 when Methuselah was born, and Enoch was commended for his faithfulness to God. According to Genesis 5, Enoch walked faithfully with God. Then he was no more, because God took him away. Methuselah's son, Lamech, was the father of Noah. Methuselah was 369 years old when Noah was born, in Genesis 5:25 through 29. And Methuselah died in the year of the flood when Noah was 600 years old, in Genesis 9:28 through 29. So, basically, Methuselah is the oldest person mentioned in the Bible, and he lived to be 969 years old. And Methuselah is listed as a descendant of Adam, who also lived nearly a millennium. Methuselah and Adam are not the only persons mentioned in the Bible living over 900 years old. Adam lived to be 930. Adam's son Seth lived to be 912. Seth's son Enos lived to be 905 years old. Methuselah's grandfather, Jared, lived to be 962 years old, and Methuselah's grandson, Noah, lived to be 950 years old. Though Methuselah lived 693 years after Adam, it is likely they knew each other since Adam lived for another 237 years after Methuselah was born. These are some of the 2,000-year-old seeds, the date palms that grew from the seeds. And this was the Methuselah tree, and has grown bigger since then. And also there's an incredible story that I have in my own book about the cedars of Lebanon that came from the forest of God, and how the Lord miraculously allowed me to acquire 200-year-old seeds, and then also some 100-year-old seeds. And I was able to get 2 little trees to sprout from those seeds, and the botanist told me there was only a 1% chance that any of them would ever sprout. And so it was really a miraculous story. And of course, the wood from the cedars of Lebanon, they actually came from the forest of God in Lebanon, and that is where King Solomon had Hiram of Tyre to travel to Lebanon, to the forest of God, to get wood to build the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And there's an incredible story in there in the book, The Almond Tree, Aaron's Rod, the Messiah, King of Israel, that I wrote, and I tell the whole story about France and the cedar of Lebanon. And so you might be very interested in reading that. At some point I had wanted to make a whole video about that whole project. I called it my Cedar of Lebanon project,